Throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition.
I like him a lot, but you know what they did was wrong. He was very nice. He apologized for what they did with the commercial, because it was a false commercial. You know, it was the exact opposite. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs, and they tried to make it look.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets.
President Trump is delaying a planned tariff hike on imported furniture and cabinets, keeping current duties in place while trade talks continue. Now, the delay comes under a proclamation tied to national security concerns over foreign wood product imports. The tariff increase, originally set for January 2026, is now pushed back 1 year. The current tariff of 25%, though, will remain in effect. The White House says predatory foreign government subsidies on imported lumber and predatory trade practices undermine the competitiveness of the American wood products industry.
North America didn't break overnight. It began months ago, in October 2025, when a single Ontario television ad triggered the sudden collapse of US-Canada trade negotiations. The ad disappeared, but the freeze didn't. Talks stayed dead for a long time, tariff threats piled up, and now, even with a last-minute tariff delay announced in 2026, the relationship is still locked in uncertainty. With the USMCA review approaching, the cracks that opened months ago are widening into something far more dangerous. The story of the US-Canada trade confrontation took a dramatic turn back in October 2025, when a single Ontario-funded television advertisement triggered one of the most abrupt diplomatic freezes in recent North American history. The ad, which used Ronald Reagan's voice to warn Americans that tariffs kill jobs, aired briefly during US broadcasts before being pulled. But the political impact was immediate. Within hours, Donald Trump announced that all trade negotiations with Canada were terminated, accusing the ad of interfering with US policy and misrepresenting the facts. The message from Washington was unmistakable. Even symbolic political messaging could provoke real economic consequences. The halt in negotiations did not resolve itself quickly. Instead, it hardened into a months-long freeze that left businesses, policymakers, and markets in a state of uncertainty. Tariff threats continued to circulate, with Trump repeatedly suggesting the possibility of a 35% blanket tariff on Canadian goods. Canada, unable to force the United States back to the table, found itself navigating a period of strategic limbo. The US economy, larger and more diversified, could absorb the uncertainty more easily, while Canada faced the disproportionate risks that come with asymmetric dependence. As the calendar turned to early 2026, the situation took an unexpected twist. Trump announced a one-year delay on certain tariff increases affecting Canadian goods, specifically furniture and kitchen cabinets. On the surface, this looked like a moment of relief, a temporary easing of pressure on Canadian exporters and a signal that the White House might be open to stabilizing the relationship. But the broader context made the delay feel less like a concession and more like a tactical pause. The negotiations were still frozen. The tariff threats still hung in the air. And the underlying political tensions had not been resolved. The economic consequences of the prolonged freeze are already visible. Analysts warn that the breakdown in talks will raise prices for home appliances, cars, and auto parts in both countries, because the supply chains that bind the US and Canada are deeply integrated. Engines, transmissions, and components cross the border multiple times before final assembly. When negotiations stall, uncertainty spreads through factories, retailers, and logistics networks. Canadian exporters face the threat of sudden tariff escalation, while US consumers face higher prices and slower deliveries. The auto sector, in particular, is vulnerable to even small disruptions. From a trade economics perspective, the halted talks reveal the deeper structure of North American trade power. Canada depends heavily on US market access, but the US also depends on Canadian inputs for its manufacturing base. When political decisions override economic logic, both sides lose efficiency, competitiveness, and stability. The Ontario ad was not an economic event, it was a political message. But in a world where politics and trade are intertwined, a single message can trigger continental consequences. The months-long freeze also exposes the asymmetry in bargaining power. The United States can afford to suspend negotiations because its economy is larger and more diversified. Canada cannot. The US can threaten blanket tariffs, Canada can only retaliate selectively. The US can absorb price increases, Canada faces disproportionate harm. This imbalance shapes every negotiation, every tariff threat, and every political confrontation. It is not about fairness or unfairness, it is about structural power. These developments cast a long shadow over the upcoming 2026 USMCA/CUSMA review. The review is legally mandated and cannot be cancelled, but the political climate surrounding it has now become far more hostile. A review that was already expected to be contentious may now unfold under the cloud of halted negotiations, retaliatory rhetoric, and unresolved tariff threats. Canada enters the review weakened, the US enters emboldened, and the entire North American trade architecture enters a period of heightened uncertainty. The review was designed to ensure stability, but it may instead become a platform for escalation. The Ontario ad incident also raises questions about how political messaging interacts with international trade. If a single advertisement can trigger the termination of negotiations, what does that say about the fragility of the relationship? What does it say about the role of public opinion in shaping trade policy? And what does it say about the willingness of governments to weaponize communication? In a world where information moves faster than diplomacy, the boundary between domestic messaging and international consequences becomes thin. The tariff delay adds another layer of complexity. On paper, delaying tariff increases should help Canadian exporters. In practice, the uncertainty created by halted talks may erase those benefits. Businesses cannot plan around temporary relief when the broader relationship is unstable. A one-year delay means little if the threat of a 35% tariff looms over the horizon. Companies may hold back on investment, delay hiring, or shift production to avoid risk. The delay becomes a bandage on a wound that is still being cut open. For the United States, the halted talks may offer short-term political gains but long-term economic risks. Higher prices for appliances, cars, and parts will hit American consumers. Manufacturers will face higher input costs. Retailers will face supply disruptions. And the US risks alienating its closest trading partner at a time when global supply chains are already under strain. The US may win the political moment but lose economic efficiency. For Canada, the halted talks are a strategic crisis. The country must prepare for the 2026 review while navigating a hostile negotiating environment. It must reassure businesses, stabilize markets, and manage public expectations. It must also decide whether to retaliate, de-escalate, or seek alternative trade partners. None of these choices are easy. All of them carry risks. The action point for policymakers, businesses, and analysts is clear: prepare for volatility. The halted talks are not an isolated event but part of a broader pattern in which political messaging can trigger economic consequences at continental scale. Companies must brace for price shocks, governments must prepare for renegotiation under pressure, and citizens must understand that the stability of North American trade is no longer guaranteed. The Ontario ad may have been a spark, but the fire was already burning. The halted talks reveal a deeper truth about the modern trade environment. It is not governed by treaties alone. It is governed by power, perception, and political will. And in that environment, even a single advertisement can reshape the economic future of two nations. So the real meaning of today's one-year tariff delay isn't peace. It's calibrated pressure. It keeps leverage alive, keeps Canada off balance, and sets the stage for harder bargaining as the USMCA review approaches. Now I want your take. Is this one-year delay a genuine step toward stability? Or is it exactly what it looks like through the trad economics lens, a pause that turns relief into leverage, and forces Canada into permanent negotiation under a timer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want analysis focused on the mechanics of power, not just headlines, subscribe to Trad Economics and turn on notifications. And share this with one person who still believes trade policy is just economics. Because in the age of weaponized interdependence, awareness isn't just insight. It's the first form of defense. See you in the next.